You could set your watch by Fritz's routine, assuming you were the kind of man who wore a watch, which Nero Wolfe wasn't. But on that Tuesday morning, when the doorbell rang at 10:08 a.m., I knew something was off. Not because of the doorbell. It rings. People come. That's life. But because Fritz, who was elbow-deep in his second batch of tarragon-laced duck pâté for that evening's guest tasting, came up from the kitchen in person to answer it. That almost never happens unless it's a food delivery that threatens his culinary sanctum. I was halfway through a fresh crossword and halfway through a cup of black Darjeeling in the front room when Fritz's footsteps echoed faster than usual. Wolfe, upstairs in the plant rooms, hadn't come down yet. Fritz flung the door open, which again, if I may repeat, is a breach of protocol in the brownstone. The guy on the steps looked like he'd lost an argument with a bottle of starch and come back for a rematch. Mid-30s, blazer too tight at the shoulders, tie askew like he'd tied it in an elevator. In one hand, he held a clipboard. In the other, a box branded with Pan Metro Catering in slick silver lettering. The kind of box that says corporate lunch for 12, not delicacy for one rotund detective. "This delivery's for Mr. Wolfe," he said, tapping the clipboard with a chewed pen. "No substitutions. Perishable. Prepaid." Fritz wrinkled his brow, which meant panic was only 2 degrees away. "There is no delivery scheduled. Mr. Wolfe would not allow—" The man shoved the clipboard toward me, like I was the only literate one in the room. "I have it here, 10 a.m. drop-off, from Pan Metro's Wednesday tasting menu. Someone booked it last week." "Today's Tuesday," I said, peering at the label. "Unless we're skipping days now, that menu's a day early." He blinked. "Oh. Yeah, maybe the client moved it up. It happens. Anyway, it's here." Fritz looked like he wanted to shriek but settled for smoothing his apron. Mr. Wolfe does not eat unreconciled food, especially unreconciled food that arrives on the wrong day from the wrong place. The delivery guy smirked, like we were the ones failing basic comprehension. "It's paid. Take it or toss it. I got other stops." And just like that, he deposited the box on our front step, signed his own clipboard with a flourish, and bolted like the aroma of anchovy paste had followed him here. I stood staring at the box like it might detonate. Fritz hovered behind me, torn between abandoning it or inspecting it for sins against his kitchen. We'd had surprises before. Flower baskets, wine samples, a poorly addressed case file or two, but never cold cuts with a side of mystery. I finally picked it up and brought it inside, setting it gingerly on the hallway console table like it had insulted my mother. "Should I tell him?" I asked Fritz. Fritz hesitated. "He will not like it. Wolfe doesn't like most things. That's hardly newsworthy." At 11 o'clock sharp, as dictated by the rotation of Earth and the timetable of his stomach, Wolfe descended from the orchid rooms, sat in his oversized chair, and muttered a low, irritable grunt that passed for good morning. I was ready for him, tea-steeped, morning mail stacked, and the offending box now carefully sealed again and placed a few feet from his chair on the credenza. "What is that?" he asked, eyeing the box like it might sprout legs. "Food," I said. "Catered. From Pan Metro Dot." He paused, as if I'd said arsenic rather than artichoke. "Explain." So I did. Delivery, early date, unexpected arrival, the brand name, the signature. I left out the part where Fritz nearly fainted, but Wolfe could probably guess. "Did you open it?" he asked. "Number, you want me to?" "Don't be an ass." That was Wolfe's way of saying yes, but don't enjoy it. I pulled the tab. Inside were 6 neatly arranged plastic-sealed entrees labeled with tomorrow's date. Wednesday selections. Saffron risotto, lemon-thyme chicken roulade, smoked lentil tartlets, all meticulously labeled with reheating instructions. It looked above board, but I've seen counterfeit bills that looked more honest. "I never ordered this," Wolfe said flatly. "Right, but someone did. Under your name. your address, with your appetite in mind. That, Wolfe muttered, is an affront. He turned to me. Dispose of it. In the trash? In someone else's stomach, if you prefer, but it shall not remain here. I carted the whole thing to the basement freezer. Waste not, want not. Wolfe may detest irregularities, but I grew up in Ohio and know a good lemon-thyme roulade when I see one. When I came back up, he was still glaring at the spot where the box had sat. "Fritz," he called. Fritz emerged from the dining room like a soldier summoned to battle. "Confirm," Wolfe said. "The names and vendors scheduled for tastings this week." "Yes, sir. Today we were to receive only our usual poultry shipment. No scheduled tastings until Thursday with Celeste Catering." "And Pan Metro?" Fritz shook his head. "Never. I've never ordered from them. I don't like their spice blends." That, from Fritz, is basically slander. Wolfe rubbed his temples. Someone has disturbed the sanctity of this house. That's when I knew he wasn't letting this go. I waited a beat before offering, "Want me to poke around a little? See who scheduled it? Maybe visit Pan Metro?" He closed his eyes. "Yes. Find out who dared." He didn't say dared like a challenge. He said it like a man contemplating the moral rot of a society that delivered risotto to unconsenting parties. I jotted a note and grabbed my coat. Wolfe returned to his chair, the orchids forgotten, the world narrowed to a single, chilled box of mystery meat. That's how it began. Not with a scream, not with a corpse, not even with a broken glass. Just a meal that came on the wrong day, and a detective who'd rather face down a killer than a cold entree out of place. By the time I reached Pan Metro's Midtown office that afternoon, I'd already spoken with 2 receptionists, 1 warehouse dispatcher, and a guy named Jared who claimed he did the invoicing but not the scheduling. All 3 gave me the kind of answers that made you want to rearrange their filing cabinets by blunt force. But I was wearing my tan suit, my manners, and my tolerance for passive incompetence. Barely. Pan Metro's lobby had the sterile charm of a dental waiting room with posters showing balsamic drizzled shrimp platters and smiling executives shaking hands over steam trays. The woman behind the reception desk had the bone structure of a Broadway understudy and the expression of someone who'd fielded 1 too many phone calls about gluten. "I'm trying to find out who scheduled a delivery to a Nero Wolfe," I said, flipping open my notebook. "It showed up this morning, 10 a.m., sharp, addressed, boxed, and prepaid. I'd like to know by whom." She didn't even blink. "We don't disclose client information." I gave her my winningest grin. "I'm not asking for blood type, lady. Just a name. No exceptions. Even if the order was fraud." Her fingers paused on her keyboard. She glanced at the monitor. "Fraud? Unauthorized order, different delivery date, wrong food, and you should know. Mr. Wolfe doesn't take kindly to being scheduled without his consent." She clicked a few keys and frowned. "There is a note. It was entered by someone named Daphne Rich." "Catering sales," I nodded. "Progress." "4th floor," she muttered. "Left of the elevators." I tipped my hat, which I wasn't wearing, and headed up. Daphne Rich turned out to be younger than I expected. Mid-20s, dark bob, glasses, and that crisp, corporate, polished vibe that suggested she could coordinate a 5-course wedding reception in under 10 minutes. Her office smelled like vanilla hand lotion and laminated menus. "I'm not sure why you're here," she said, flipping open a digital tablet like it was a shield. "The Wolfe order was prepaid, logged, and delivered on time. Except today's not Wednesday, and Wolfe didn't order anything." She tapped the screen. "Confirmed. Scheduled by A. Vandermeer last Thursday. Paid online. Preferred delivery Tuesday. Boxed from the Wednesday menu by request." "A. Vandermeer," I said, rolling the name around in my head. "You have a number or contact info?" She hesitated. "Number paid through a company card. Metro charge account." Not Pan Metro's card? No, the client's. Corporate. Vandermeer Limited. Now we were talking. Vandermeer. It had the kind of ring that comes with either inherited furniture or lawsuits. Mind telling me how many orders this Vandermeer placed? She scrolled. Just this one. I thanked her and left before she could ask who I was with. Back outside, I called Saul Panzer. If anyone could run a name through the grinder and spit out a full genealogy report, it was Saul. I gave him the name and asked for anything useful. Addresses, known associates, skeletons. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had moved on from glowering at the leftover packaging to sorting through old recipe catalogues, which he claimed he never read but kept anyway. I gave him the name. Vandermeer, he said, eyelids half closed. Familiar. There is a trust by that name. Possibly article, possibly textiles. It's a company, Vandermeer Limited. Paid for the delivery. He sniffed. Intentional. You think it was deliberate? I think, Wolfe said, someone is laying a table they have not yet invited us to sit at. He had a point. Most people who wanted to meet Wolfe started with a call or a letter. They didn't begin by tampering with his dinner schedule. That was tantamount to showing up uninvited to a chess match and moving a bishop without asking. At 6 o'clock, Fritz came into the office with a scowl. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Fritz has faced down sauce shortages and mushroom recalls with more composure. Mr. Wolfe, he said, there has been another disruption. Define it, Wolfe growled. The veal, it is missing. Wolfe looked up. Missing? Gone. 2 trimmed cuts. I placed them in the secondary refrigerator. I returned 5 minutes ago. Empty. Now Wolfe's eyes opened fully. You don't tamper with Wolfe's veal. It was practically his second religion. Who has entered the kitchen today? Wolfe asked. No one, Fritz said. I locked the door when I stepped out. You and Mr. Goodwin have not been down. I confirmed that. Wolfe didn't so much as visit the ground floor unless compelled, and I'd been upstairs or on the move since noon. Someone, Wolfe said, rising a quarter-inch in his chair, has violated my house. It was a quiet sentence, but it had the resonance of thunder. I'd heard Wolfe roar, insult, dismiss, and pontificate. But when he dropped into that low, even tone, you knew we'd crossed from nuisance to war. I want Saul here, he said. Tonight. I called. Saul was already digging into Vandermeer and promised to swing by before 9. Meanwhile, I checked the rear locks, the pantry access, the windows, everything short of booby-trapping the fridge. Nothing showed signs of a break-in. No cameras, no footprints, no scuff marks. At 8:52 p.m., Saul arrived with 2 folders and the look of a man who had found more than expected. Vandermeer Limited, he said, handing over the first file. Shell Company. Address listed as an office suite in a building that burned out 2 months ago. No active employees. Payments traced to an offshore account. Whoever set it up didn't want it traced back. And the name itself? Wolfe asked. Saul pulled the second file. Turns out Vandermeer was the maiden name of a woman named Giselle Aramont. Heiress, art circles. Used to host tastings for private collectors. Paintings and hors d'oeuvres, mostly. Married a financier. Divorced. She runs a private dining club now. Uptown Giselle Aramont, Wolfe repeated. Yes, I met her once. She argued about clove usage in Moroccan pigeon pie. Saul raised an eyebrow. Friend or foe? She is, Wolfe said. Not a friend. That's all he said. Which from Wolfe was practically a declaration of vendetta. He closed the folder, steepled his fingers, and stared at the ceiling. I suspect, he said finally, we are no longer discussing food. That's how it works with Wolfe. You start with misplaced chicken and end up knee-deep in motives wrapped in puff pastry. Someone had entered the brownstone, Not through a door, but through something worse. Wolfe's meal schedule. That wasn't a mistake. It was a message. And someone, somewhere, was waiting for us to respond. Wolfe doesn't go chasing suspects. He waits until they orbit close enough for him to strike. Mentally, of course. Like a planetary predator with a vocabulary. But that doesn't mean he doesn't know exactly when to pull the strings to tighten the circle. That Thursday morning, with Fritz in a fury over stolen veal and Saul still digging into offshore mysteries, Wolfe summoned me to the office while sipping his second glass of chilled tomato juice. That was the signal he was ready to escalate. "You will make appointments," he said without so much as a good morning, "with 4 individuals. Do not call. Visit." "Names?" I asked, notepad out. He handed over a folded sheet with the precision of a man handing off a warrant. 4 names, each with a corresponding note in Wolfe's sharp architectural hand. 1. Giselle Aramont, private dining entrepreneur. Former heiress, formerly known for collecting pre-war Italian oils and post-war culinary enemies. 2. Clinton Severin, executive chef, Pan Metro, allegedly dismissed for creative disagreements 3 weeks ago. 3. Annabelle Annie Vandermeer, legal representative for the now defunct Vandermeer Trust. 4. Milton K. Bridge, food critic, Gastronome Quarterly, known for publishing an article Wolfe tore out and burned. "This is our circle?" I asked. "For now," Wolfe replied. "They intersect at cuisine, finance, or insult, all viable motives for sabotage." "And I assume I should start with Giselle." Wolfe sipped. "You should start with the most theatrical." That naturally meant Giselle Aramont. Her private dining club, L'Étagère Noire, was the kind of place where you needed a reservation, a tailored jacket, and preferably a title. Duke, Doctor, or Donor. I walked in as Archie Goodwin, which, to my surprise, got me past the velvet, rope, and into a dining room that looked like Versailles had been run through a dimmer switch. Giselle met me at the bar. She had the bone structure of a champagne flute and the voice of someone who assumed her name had weight in any room. She wore dark burgundy and a diamond brooch shaped like a dagger. I complimented neither. "Mr. Wolfe sent you?" she asked, swirling her drink. "How deliciously inevitable." "You sent him food. He's not returning the favor." She arched a brow. It was a gesture. Unsolicited gestures at Nero Wolfe's front door don't usually come wrapped in risotto. She laughed. Poor dear. I wanted to get his attention. I always found it thrilling to see what would make him flinch. Well, he flinched. Then he checked for poison. Her smile thinned. "I've never served poison, Mr. Goodwin. Not in the literal sense." "Do you know Clinton Severin?" She looked bored by the question. "Pan Metro's ex-chef. A man with ambition, no palate, and a habit of overcooking duck. Yes, I know him, briefly. He wanted to consult for me. I declined. Why? Because I don't hire chefs who think foam is a food group." Giselle clearly had opinions, and I had more questions, but she waved me off with a perfumed flick of her fingers and a line about dinner reservations. "Tell Wolfe," she said, standing to go, "that the veal was not my doing. But if he's ready to talk, I have a seat saved for him." Next up was Clinton Severin. His new test kitchen was a barely renovated industrial space off 11th Avenue that smelled like desperation and unused rosemary. I found him elbow deep in what looked like beet-glazed scallops on polenta crisps. "Wolfe," he said, sneering before I even opened my mouth, "still thinks herbs are more important than technique. Wolfe thinks anything oversauced is a confession." He snorted. "Look, if this is about Pan Metro, I've been out 3 weeks. I hated that place. I quit because they wanted me to standardize recipes. You know what that means?" I shrugged. "It means you were replaced by a spreadsheet." Exactly. That's when I knew I needed my own name on the door. "You know Giselle Aramont?" He rolled his eyes. Yeah. She sniffed around my resume for half a week. Then she ghosted me, said I was too modernist. Did you take that personally? He laughed, a short, bitter laugh. Of course I did. But not personally enough to start sending Wolfe frozen duck. I've got my own battles. Like financing. If you're here to accuse me, at least bring something edible. I left him scowling at his stove and went uptown to meet Annabelle Vandermeer. The former legal guardian of the trust Wolfe suspected was at the center of this culinary oddity. Her office was nestled in one of those tasteful brick townhouses that screams old money with bad knees. She greeted me in a houndstooth jacket, spectacles hanging from a gold chain and the kind of politeness that masks either deep secrets or deep boredom. I haven't used the Vandermeer Limited account in over a year, she said after I laid out the problem. It was decommissioned. I oversaw the transfer of all active holdings. Then who's using it now? She sighed. Anyone who had the old access credentials, which could be more than one person. That trust changed hands often. Giselle had proxy status for a period. Recently? Number, but if she copied the credentials before she was removed, she'd still have a back door. Why was she removed? Annabelle glanced at the framed portrait of an ancestor behind her. Irregularities. She redirected funds for what she called curated dining initiatives. Mostly, she spent too much. And the trust cut her off? Dramatically. That left one more. Milton K. Bridge. The man who'd once dared write a full-page takedown of Wolfe's stubbornness about Szechuan peppercorns. I found him nursing an espresso in a bookstore cafe, scrawling in a moleskin with one hand and sipping with the other. I wondered when you'd come, he said, not looking up. I always figured Wolfe would hold a grudge. Grudge. Number he saves grudges for major transgressions. You're more of a footnote. Then why send his errand boy? I didn't like that, but I kept my tone mild. Because your name turned up next to others connected to a culinary chain of events. Wolfe doesn't believe in coincidence. Bridge finally looked up. Then he'll love this. I had dinner at l'Étagère Noire 2 weeks ago. Giselle Aramont comped the meal. Told me she wanted a profile in gastronomy. I declined. Why? I said her dishes were competent, not inspired. She called me a dilettante. I said she was more host than chef. So no love lost. She's the kind of woman who thinks serving foie gras in silence makes her an artist. Do you think she could have sent Wolfe the food? He smiled. If she did, it wasn't to please him. It was to provoke him. That evening I gave Wolfe the summary. 4 suspects. 4 different motives. Ego, access, revenge, and ruin. Wolfe didn't interrupt once. He let me finish, then closed his eyes and murmured, Giselle Aramont. She's too clever for overt gestures. Clinton is too vain. Annabelle too cautious. Bridge too petty. So what now? He opened his eyes. Now we wait. The bait was sent. The theft occurred. Someone has staked a claim, but they have yet to play their hand. He paused. They will. Dinner that night was simple. Corn chowder, a baguette, and a tense silence that made the butter knife sound like a guillotine. Wolfe was thinking, and that meant the rest of us had better be ready. If Nero Wolfe were a general, I'd be the infantry, cavalry, and field medic rolled into one. He stays seated, and I go charging into the mess. So, when he asked me to dig deeper, talk to the cooks, critics, lawyers, and liars, I did what I do best, walk the pavement, flash my credentials, and act like I wasn't already annoyed at everyone I was about to meet. First stop, a conversation with the one person nobody had interviewed yet. That's because she hadn't existed in the records Wolfe pulled from the trust accounts. But Saul, being Saul, had passed along a name. Marcia Leamont, former administrative assistant to Vandermeer Limited. She had apparently vanished from her position just before the account was flagged as inactive. No exit notice, no forwarding contact, just a clean break and a digital trail that stopped cold. I found her 2 days later in a quiet little tea shop off Mulberry, tucked between a dry cleaner and a psychic who read palms in 3 languages. She was alone, nursing a mug of chamomile and scrolling her phone with the intensity of a person who didn't want to be recognized. I slid into the seat across from her and flashed a polite smile. "Marcia Lemont. You used to work for the Vandermeer Trust." Her mouth flattened and she set the mug down slowly. "Who are you?" "Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe." That got a reaction. Nothing dramatic, just the subtle shift of posture that tells you someone knows the name and it doesn't mean anything good. "I haven't worked for them in over a year." "I heard. That's what's interesting." "I left," she said, voice crisp, "because I didn't want to be dragged into the mess." "What mess?" Her eyes narrowed. "You think I'm going to spell it out for you?" "Number, but I think you want Wolfe to have the truth before someone else twists it." That hung in the air for a moment. She glanced around the cafe like she was expecting someone with a press badge or a subpoena to appear. "I was the one who flagged the misuse," she finally said. "Giselle was rerouting trust funds. Small amounts, disguised as event costs." "Toward what?" Marcia hesitated. "I don't know. Catering, supplies, event infrastructure, whatever that means. But the events weren't booked. There were no guest lists, no venues." "Ghost events?" "Exactly. I brought it up to the board representative. A week later, I was let go, without cause." "And no one followed up?" "Annabelle did in her way. She pushed Giselle out quietly, closed the account, and buried the whole thing." "So you think Giselle's still using the credentials?" "She always played the long game. If she had something planned, it wouldn't be impulsive. She likes to watch people walk into her traps." I left Marcia with a refill and a warning. If Giselle reached out again, she was to call me, collect if needed. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe took the news with a grim nod. Fritz, meanwhile, had started locking every pantry cabinet with keys he wore on a cord around his neck. He'd also installed a motion sensor in the cellar fridge, which beeped any time someone got too curious with the duck fat. Next day, I doubled back to Pan Metro. I wanted another crack at their operations manager, a pale, nervous fellow named Gregory Tish, who looked like a sheet of paper with a tie. The last time I dropped by, he ducked behind an assistant and claimed he wasn't authorized. This time, I walked in with confidence and asked to see the logs for delivery dispatch, specifically the internal routing for Wolfe's surprise meal. After 10 minutes of shuffle-footed excuses and passive resistance, Tish gave in. "There was a flag," he admitted. "When the order was entered, someone noted it as manual override." "That's not standard?" He shook his head. "Most orders are systemized. This one was input directly, with admin clearance." "Who holds that clearance?" He gulped. "Only 2 people, myself and Clinton Severin, when he was head chef." "Still using the same login?" Tish looked away. "He might not have been officially removed from the admin list." I left with a copy of the dispatch note, complete with timestamp. It had been keyed in at 11:17 p.m. on a Friday night, long after normal business hours. So Severin still had access, and he used it. I called Wolfe from a payphone, his preference when we're dealing with people who think surveillance is just good etiquette. He listened without comment, then told me to track down another thread, the food critic, Bridge. I found him back at the bookstore cafe, this time with a stack of proofs from his latest column. I bought him a latte and leaned in. "Still denying involvement?" He rolled his eyes. "Wolfe thinks I'd send him duck as an insult? I insult him for free." "You're connected to Giselle. That puts you in the circle." "She offered me a bribe," he said bluntly. "Said she wanted me to write a takedown of Pan Metro. Said it was getting too corporate, too bland. She wanted a full column slamming their menu. And did you write it? Number Y wrote a piece on Basque tapas instead. But she was pushy about it. Called me twice. Left messages. Still have them. Bridge blinked. Maybe. He checked his phone and after some scrolling, played me 2 voicemails. In one, Giselle talked about burning the blandness out of the scene. In the second, she asked if he wanted a sample delivery to better understand what she meant. You see, Bridge muttered. I didn't want to get involved. She was manic about it. I got the recordings copied to a flash drive and brought them home. That evening, Wolfe listened to both messages with the expression of a man who had just detected mold in his wine cellar. Saul sat nearby, having just returned with further confirmation that Clinton Severin had never formally been removed from Pan Metro's back-end system. It's all performative, Wolfe said quietly. They each contributed to the illusion. But only one could have arranged the theft, the override, and the invitation. And you know who? Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He just stared into the office's dim corner, where the faint scent of cinnamon still lingered from Fritz's afternoon baking. I know, he said finally, but we are not ready. Why not? Because we haven't given them a chance to lie in person. That was Wolfe's way of saying it was time. The office gathering was coming. The suspects had been lined up, the pieces moved, the players baited. The food, the delivery, the missing veal, it was all part of the same slow-cooked dish, and Wolfe was almost ready to serve it. Wolfe doesn't keep weapons in the house, not the kind that make noise anyway. His arsenal is made up of sharp memory, colder logic, and the occasional crushing monologue. So when something shifts in the brownstone, a towel folded wrong, a page turned when it shouldn't be, I know it isn't a mistake. It's an intrusion, and Wolfe treats intrusions the way cats treat water. This one started quietly, as they usually do. Fritz had just finished preparing a plum tart for Wolfe's post-lunch indulgence and went to retrieve his favorite carving knife, an antique with a horn handle and blade honed sharper than most business contracts. He returned 5 minutes later with a face like marble and announced, in a voice laced with frost, "The knife has been moved." Wolfe looked up from his latest French import, a volume on Burgundian vinegars. "Explain," he said, which from Wolfe meant, "I already know something is wrong. Tell me how badly." "I keep it in the drawer to the left of the spice wall. It was not there. I found it inside the butcher's drawer beneath the cleaver." "And no one else has been in the kitchen?" "Certainly not." I stood. Could it be a slip? Maybe you moved it yourself last time and didn't remember. Fritz turned to me with the kind of look normally reserved for overcooked fish. "I do not misplace steel, Mr. Goodwin, especially not that knife." "Anything else disturbed?" Wolfe asked. "Yes," Fritz said after a pause. "The spice tins. Tarragon and sumac were switched." Now that was meaningful. Fritz arranges spices alphabetically and by frequency of use, with almost military discipline. The man treats cumin like a house guest and coriander like a cousin. If the tins were out of order, someone wasn't just poking around. They were testing something. Wolfe set down his book and pressed his fingertips together. "This is no longer sabotage," he murmured. "This is theater." I asked the obvious. "You think someone snuck in here just to stir the pantry?" "I think someone is demonstrating access," Wolfe said, "and subtlety." It wasn't the first time someone had tampered with the brownstone. We've had burglars, journalists, and one memorable accountant with a gambling problem. But this was different. This wasn't random or messy. It was deliberate. Small changes, just visible enough to be noticed by those who live here. "Archie," Wolfe said, "re-examine the perimeter. Check for entries that wouldn't require forced access." I started at the ground level and worked my way up, windows locked, doors secure, no scratches, no dust trails. But the basement, where Fritz stores his dry goods, had a small side hatch originally used for coal deliveries 100 years ago. We'd sealed it years back, but I found fresh scrape marks on the inside edge. Barely visible. The kind a screwdriver or key could make. Someone had opened it, then carefully resecured it. I showed Wolfe the evidence. He nodded once, slowly. "They are probing," he said. "Testing your reaction?" "Yes, measuring to what end?" "To see how quickly we notice." We sat in silence for a while, Wolfe brooding and I pacing. There was no reason to believe someone had planted anything dangerous. But the act itself, the quiet, clever rearrangement of tools and spices, was Wolfe's equivalent of a glove across the cheek. A challenge, and he never ignored those. That night I went back to Clinton Severin's test kitchen. It was empty. The door was locked, but not hard to pick. Purely for academic purposes, of course. Inside I found signs that someone had left in a hurry. A pan with cake sauce, an open bottle of vermouth, and a scrap of paper with a handwritten menu titled Blind Course Concept. Next to it was a list of ingredients: lamb shank, pomegranate molasses, ghost pepper oil. I took the list and photographed the room, then relocked it and vanished into the night like a gentleman burglar. Back at the brownstone, Saul had returned with more intel. His report was succinct. Clinton Severin rented the test kitchen using a Pan Metro contact, claimed it was R&D for consultants. He's been meeting there with someone, female, long coat, sunglasses, described as sharp-voiced, late 30s. "Giselle?" I asked. "Likely, but not confirmed." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "She would not return to the scene herself unless she needed assurance." "Assurance of what?" "Control." At 8:10 the next morning, I discovered the second violation. My notebook, my personal one, not the case log, had been tampered with. I leave it in my drawer, usually beneath a few stray receipts and paper clips. But that morning, it was on top. The pages looked untouched, but someone had clearly moved it. I flipped through and found a single page missing, torn neatly from the center. It was a grocery list I'd drafted 3 days earlier. Irrelevant, unimportant, and missing. I showed Wolfe. "Ah," he said, "that confirms it." "Confirms what?" "This is not about food. It is about precision." He paused, then added, "And rehearsal." "Rehearsal for what?" "For an entrance," he said. "But we have seen the dress rehearsal. Now we shall stage the performance." I didn't know what that meant yet. But when Wolfe starts speaking like a stage manager, it means the curtain's about to rise, and someone's going to exit in disgrace. Later that afternoon, Fritz reported a third disturbance. Someone had written, in the condensation of the cellar fridge's glass, the word "taste," in all caps. With a finger, it had evaporated by the time I got there, but the word was clear. Taste. A warning, a prompt, or worse, an invitation. Wolfe had had enough. "Call them," he said to me. "All four. Severin, Giselle, Annabelle, Bridge." "For what time?" He looked at the clock. "Tomorrow, 11 sharp." "In the office?" He glared at me. "Of course." "Any specific message?" He thought about it, then said, "Tell them Nero Wolfe wishes to conclude a matter concerning flavor, theft, and gall." That should do it. As I made the calls, I couldn't help thinking about that one word left behind in the fog of the fridge. Taste. It wasn't random. It was almost poetic. Which was exactly the kind of thing that made Wolfe furious, but it had served its purpose. The brownstone had been breached. The kitchen, the tools, the files, all touched, no force, just presence. And now the suspects were coming straight to Wolfe's office. I had the chairs arranged, the doorbell was cleaned, and Fritz was sharpening knives, not for use, but for principle. Wolfe was ready to speak, which meant someone was about to get carved, no cutlery required. Wolfe doesn't pace. He broods, he stews, he ruminates, but the moment he starts adjusting the position of his paperweight or asking Fritz to bring the yellow chair back into rotation, I know he's preparing to drop the trap, and that's exactly what he did the morning of the scheduled office confrontation. The guests were due at 11. At 10:30, Wolfe asked me to adjust the angle of the Venetian blinds so sunlight hit only the far corner of the office. This had no tactical value, but Wolfe claimed it eliminated the illusion of openness. He liked his suspects cornered, mentally and spatially. Fritz, dressed like a butler in a melodrama, set out the chilled water and cleaned the guest chairs for the third time. Saul arrived in his quiet way and took up position in the front room like a shadow with a press pass. Then came the doorbell, on the dot of 11, because Wolfe's enemies either fear his punctuality or want to imitate it. The order of entry told me everything. Giselle arrived first, alone, wearing a high-collared coat and the expression of a woman who expected admiration as tribute. Next came Clinton Severin, hands in his coat pockets, chewing gum like it owed him money. Annabelle Vandermeer followed, efficient and stone-faced. And last, right on cue, Milton Bridge, the only man who looked like he regretted accepting the invitation. I took their coats and showed them in. Wolfe, of course, didn't rise. He sat behind his desk like a marble bust of justice with a more expensive palette. "You know why you're here," Wolfe said flatly. "Mr. Goodwin will summarize the facts." So I did. The catering delivery, the unauthorized use of the Vandermeer account, the missing veal, the moved spices, the tampered fridge, the word taste left in condensation. No one interrupted, which either meant they were nervous or well-trained. When I finished, Wolfe gestured to me without looking. "Now we begin." He turned his eyes to Clinton Severin first. "You had administrative access to Pan Metro's catering system well after your departure." "I didn't use it," Severin said. "The entry came from your login at 11:17 p.m., a Friday night." He shrugged. "Then someone hacked it." Wolfe smiled, but it was cold. "No one hacks Pan Metro for duck delivery. They do it for effect. For theater." He turned to Bridge. "You received 2 voicemails from Miss Aramont, both suggesting sabotage of Pan Metro's reputation. Did you comply?" "I declined her request," Bridge said stiffly. "I have the messages. Archie heard them." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured. "You were the voice, not the hand." Then to Annabelle. "You oversaw the closure of the Vandermeer account, but failed to revoke all credentials." Annabelle bristled. "No one instructed me to erase access. The board said to bury the scandal." "Convenient," Wolfe said. "You removed Giselle's official proxy but left the back door open. Was that intentional?" "I don't answer to you, Mr. Wolfe." "Number, but if you had, you might have avoided this." He finally turned to Giselle. "You orchestrated a delivery to my home," he said. "Not to delight me, but to bait me." Giselle tilted her head, playing coy. "Nonsense. I sent you food. You like food." "You sent Wednesday's menu on a Tuesday," Wolfe replied. "You used an expired trust. You involved a chef with a grudge, a critic with a reputation, and a lawyer with a motive to deflect, all under the pretense of culinary goodwill." She spread her hands. "You're giving me far too much credit." Wolfe leaned back. "Not credit. Accountability." The tension in the room thickened like overcooked bechamel. I watched Severin shift in his seat, Bridge drum his fingers, Annabelle purse her lips. Only Giselle remained still, until Wolfe dropped the next stone. "You entered my house?" he said. Silence. "You, or someone acting on your behalf, breached this brownstone 3 times. Once to remove veal, once to move tools, once to leave a word." "Absurd," she whispered. "No," Wolfe said. "Calculated. He motioned to Saul, who stepped forward and placed a small plastic tab on Wolfe's desk. "This," Wolfe said, "is the thumbprint scanner lifted from the cellar latch. We matched the partial print to a secondary wine glass handled by Ms. Aramont last year, during a charity auction." I raised an eyebrow. That was new. Saul had worked fast. "You entered," Wolfe said again. "You made small changes to signal control, to say, 'I can reach you.'" "But why?" Bridge asked, barely able to look up. Wolfe answered for all of them. "Because Giselle Aramont is not merely exacting revenge. She is staging a demonstration. Pan Metro dismissed Clinton. Bridge ignored her. Vandermeer erased her access. I rejected her culinary theory a decade ago. This," he pointed to the entire tableau, "was her response." Severin shook his head. "I didn't know she was using me." "You knew enough," Wolfe said. "You gave her access. You accepted payment, through wine, through favors. You participated in the illusion." Wolfe stood, slowly. "You all did." That was rare. Wolfe standing was the equivalent of another man screaming. You each enabled a performance, a spectacle of control, of disdain. Ms. Aramont believes taste is power, that she alone dictates whose palate deserves reverence. She violated this house, not out of malice, but to prove she could season reality to her liking. There was nothing to say after that. Not for a long minute. Giselle finally exhaled. "Bravo," she whispered. "You do still understand flavor." "You're finished," Wolfe said, sitting again. "Not ruined, not charged, but finished." Annabelle stood and left first, quietly. Severin followed with a curse under his breath. Bridge, red-faced, shook Wolfe's hand and apologized, twice. Giselle lingered. "You know I'll find another way," she said. "Of course," Wolfe replied, "but not through my door." She smiled, wider than I liked, and walked out. Fritz entered moments later, eyes narrowed. "Shall I prepare lunch, sir?" Wolfe exhaled. "Yes. No surprises." I sat back, rubbing my neck. "That," I said, "was high cuisine." "No," Wolfe muttered. "That was poison, disguised with garnish." And with that, he opened the newspaper and resumed reading. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled faintly of rosemary and vengeance. You can always tell when Wolfe is shifting from defense to offense. It's subtle. He doesn't announce it, doesn't wave a flag. But the temperature in the brownstone changes. His commands become fewer, his silences longer, and Fritz starts preparing heavier lunches. That's how I knew, even before he said a word, that Wolfe wasn't satisfied with what we'd dragged into the office and flayed apart. Something was still unbalanced. He hadn't played his final card. Not yet. The day after the confrontation, Wolfe summoned me to the office right after breakfast. He was in his chair, freshly shaven, the morning mail stacked unread beside him. "Archie," he said, "we will not wait for her next move." That narrowed it down to one woman with high heels and low ethics. Giselle. Indeed, she thinks she's made her point, that her trespass has gone unpunished, but the subtlety of her methods demands a proportionate reply. You want me to slap her with a restraining order or send her a box of moldy chèvre? He didn't blink. You will arrange a private tasting at her club. You will pose as a reviewer. I blinked back. A reviewer. Not from Gastronom, from Taster's Compass. A new publication, very niche, very exclusive. You're scouting chefs for a multi-profile piece on post-traditionalist fusion. Use those words precisely. I made a note and kept my mouth shut. When Wolfe starts handing out fake publications and buzzwords, it means he's setting bait, and I'm the poor soul who has to wriggle like a worm on the hook. "You expect she'll take the bait?" I asked. "She cannot resist a stage," Wolfe said. "She will perform, and in doing so, she will err." So I pulled out my tan blazer, combed my hair like a man who reads menus with a monocle, and made the call to l'étagère noire under the name Andrew Glenn. It took all of 5 minutes to get a booking. When I mentioned post-traditionalist fusion, they gave me Tuesday at 7, with a private booth and a select menu preview. I showed up early, the way Wolfe likes it, and took mental snapshots of everything: the server's choreography, the color of the wine glasses, the angle of the candlelight. I was halfway through a foie gras lollipop on a toasted brioche crisp when Giselle floated over, dressed in silver and framed by 2 trailing staff, like an empress with her entourage. "Mr. Glenn," she said, extending a hand. "How delightful." "The pleasure's mine," I said in my best affected drawl. She waved the waiters away and sat down across from me. "I hope you're finding the experience suitably innovative." "It's a symphony in 10 bites," I said. She laughed. "Exactly what I aim for." "I'd love to meet the chef." "There is no chef tonight," she said smoothly. "I designed this menu myself." I took another bite. "Impressive. I'd love to profile you personally." "Of course," she said. "I'll have my assistant forward you my credentials." We talked for another 15 minutes, mostly about herself, her vision, her hatred of inherited tradition in cooking. But underneath the charm was something brittle. She needed to be watched, noticed, validated. Wolfe had pegged her perfectly. Her crime wasn't revenge. It was curation. When I left, she gave me a gift bag with truffle caramels and a handwritten quote tucked inside. "Taste is not what we inherit. It's what we claim." Wolfe would roll his eyes so hard, they'd detach. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the rundown. He listened with his eyes closed, index fingers pressed together as if trying to hear some faint frequency I'd missed. "She's building a brand," I said. "Every dish is a statement. She's not trying to win praise. She's trying to provoke." "That is her flaw," Wolfe said. "Her ego?" "Number her need to provoke. She believes confrontation is an art form. She believes every reaction proves her power. So what's next?" "She will receive an invitation," Wolfe said, "to cater a private demonstration here, in this house, with an audience of 1. I sat up straight. "You want her to cook here, in your kitchen?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and you will deliver the request in person. She will see it as a triumph, but it will be her undoing." The invitation, drafted on Wolfe's personal stationery, was phrased as only he could: respectful, formal, and filled with veiled contempt. He praised her palate, acknowledged the uniqueness of her recent delivery, and stated that he was finally open to a private presentation. I delivered it the next day. She accepted instantly. "She'll bring a small team," I told Wolfe afterward. "No more than 2 sous chefs and a server, all vetted," she says. "She'll bring no one." That was the second part of Wolfe's plan. He'd instructed Fritz to vacate the kitchen for 1 evening only, and handed me the task of installing 2 hidden cameras, one by the spice rack, another by the cold prep area. "She will perform," Wolfe said, "and in doing so, she will reveal her mechanism." "You think she's going to tamper with something?" "I think she cannot resist touching what she should not." The night of the demonstration, Giselle arrived, dressed like a sculptor unveiling her final marble. She brought no staff, as Wolfe had predicted, and requested silence while she prepared the sequence. I watched from the hallway as she unpacked ingredients like relics. She examined Fritz's knives, adjusted the spice tins, yes, again, and even opened the cellar fridge once. She wasn't just preparing food, she was rehearsing power. When the meal began, Wolfe said little. He ate every bite, slowly, precisely. After dessert, a deconstructed lemon tart with black pepper meringue, he placed his fork down. "Thank you," he said. "This confirms what I needed to know." She tilted her head. "Which is?" "That your talent," he said, is equal only to your arrogance. That ended the night. After she left, Saul joined us in the office. He'd monitored the cameras from the front room. She touched the same knife drawer, Saul said. Moved a tin again, this time fennel. She left a handwritten note behind the mortar. Wolfe read the note in silence. It said, "You watched." I acted. We understand each other now. He placed it on the flame of his cigar lighter and let it burn. That, he said, was her confession. But she didn't admit anything. She admitted control, Wolfe said, and in doing so admitted intrusion. The trespasses were not accidental. They were rituals, symbols. I sat back. So what now? We publish. Call the board. Send it to Pan Metro's lawyers. No, Wolfe said. We send it to her. He drafted a final letter. No flourishes, no praise. Just a single sentence. You have proven your palate. Your presence, however, is no longer welcome in this house, nor in any kitchen that values honesty over theater. Saul delivered it the next morning. Giselle never replied. She didn't need to. Her performance was over, and Wolfe, as always, had stolen the final act. If you've never seen Wolfe in full performance mode, I'll paint you a picture. Imagine a man sitting completely still in a chair that's practically throne-sized, with a yellow silk handkerchief in his breast pocket, 3 inches of daylight between his shoes and the floor, and the air around him so heavy with judgment you could slice it and serve it chilled. That's Nero Wolfe preparing to humiliate someone with facts and syntax alone. This was the second gathering, what Wolfe considered the real one. The first had stirred the pot. This one would serve the soup. He had called it himself 2 days after Giselle's private demonstration. It was an invitation they couldn't refuse, because it didn't sound like one. It sounded like a verdict waiting to be handed down. The summonses went out without pleasantries, 1 sentence per person, requesting their immediate presence in Wolfe's office on Friday at 11:30. Sharp. Same names. Giselle Aramont, Clinton Severin, Annabelle Vandermeer, Milton Bridge. And again, they came. They always do. This time, there were no preambles. No tea, no water, no polite folderol. Fritz had cleared the space. Saul was seated quietly in the corner, and I stood near the door, arms folded, watching the room like a man who expected someone to bolt, which I did. Wolfe didn't ask them to sit. He just began. You each sought leverage, he said, in different forms. Some sought relevance. Some professional re-entry. Some reputation management. And one, his eyes went to Giselle, sought art through disruption. Giselle did not flinch. If anything, she leaned in, like a pupil awaiting critique. What you failed to anticipate, Wolfe continued, was that the common thread among you would be used not to elevate your ambitions, but to expose them. Annabelle spoke first. If this is about that ridiculous tasting, this is about trespass, Wolfe interrupted, and the room stilled. Literal, metaphorical, culinary. Each of you contributed knowingly to a chain of provocations that culminated in unlawful entry, material manipulation, and attempted intimidation. Unlawful, Clinton sneered. No one broke in. You did, Wolfe said. Not with crowbars, but credentials, abandoned logins, stolen access, and taste. Bridge cleared his throat. I didn't participate in anything criminal. No, Wolfe replied. You participated in something worse. You observed the sabotage and chose complicity through silence. You let a performance unfold because it flattered your position. Wolfe turned again to Giselle. I offered you an audience, he said, and you treated my house like a gallery. The veal, the spice tins, the cellar note. You curated them. Your medium was subtlety, and your message was control, but in the end, it was petty. And petty does not endure. She said nothing. Her hands folded over her handbag. Still calm. Still poised. Wolfe opened a folder and produced a single printout. "This," he said, "is a transcript of your preparation in my kitchen. 2 cameras recorded your every move. You altered spice placement again. You left a note behind a mortar. You handled drawers you had no need to open, all for effect. That is not the behavior of a chef. It is the behavior of a saboteur." She lifted her chin slightly. "Then charge me." "No," Wolfe said. "That would dignify your intent. What I intend instead is exile." A beat. Then Wolfe looked at Saul, who nodded once and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a letter on Wolfe's letterhead, already sent to 6 elite food organizations, 3 culinary review boards, and the Board of Trustees for the Culinary Guild of New York. The letter documented, without drama or speculation, the sequence of events: unauthorized deliveries, account misuse, evidence of trespass, and professional misconduct. Attached were the recordings, the tampering logs, and a summary of Wolfe's findings. "You've distributed this?" Annabelle asked sharply. "Already received," Saul confirmed. "No press involvement. No legal accusation. Just information." Giselle's lips pressed together tightly. She knew what it meant. Wolfe wasn't trying to destroy her. He was isolating her, and isolation, to someone who thrived on audience, was worse than scandal. "Your clubs," Wolfe said. "Your invitations. Your consultant arrangements. They will wither. Not by lawsuit, but by absence. You will not be reviled. You will be ignored." She didn't reply. For the first time, she looked cornered, not because she was being screamed at or physically threatened, but because no one in that room needed to raise a voice to bury her. Bridge stood awkwardly. "And the rest of us?" "You were pawns," Wolfe said. "But pawns have will. You may salvage your dignity by admitting error, or, as most do, by pretending this never happened." Annabelle rose and left without another word. Severin muttered something about a witch hunt and trailed after her, sulking. Bridge, still red-faced, looked at Wolfe, then me, then Giselle, and mumbled, "I'll write something honest about all of this." Wolfe grunted, "Try writing something true." Bridge nodded and departed. Only Giselle remained. She stood slowly, adjusted her coat, and regarded Wolfe as if memorizing him. "You couldn't have let it go." "No." "You couldn't have accepted the food and moved on?" "No." She nodded once, slowly. "You're very good, Mr. Wolfe." "I'm precise," he said. "There's a difference." She left, and with that, the gathering ended. Wolfe sat back, closing the folder and removing his glasses. Fritz entered with a tray, beef stew with toasted rye, which Wolfe accepted with mild satisfaction. I stayed behind in the office, leaning against the walls. He spooned up his lunch with the posture of a man resetting his universe. "That's it?" I asked. "No grand exit? No monologue?" "She said it herself," Wolfe replied. "I'm very good." "You are." He chewed for a moment. "But I'm also right. Also true." He gestured at the now empty chairs. "There is a disease in people like her, Archie. The belief that mastery justifies trespass, that talent absolves arrogance. It does not. It only masks it until someone pulls back the curtain." I nodded, then looked at the room one last time. The chairs, the files, the faint scent of citrus from Giselle's perfume. "What now?" Wolfe dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "Now," he said, "we cleanse the kitchen." And just like that, it was over. A Nero Wolfe reveal is not a performance. It's a reckoning. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't flick open a file with dramatic flair, and certainly doesn't walk across the room to point at the culprit. He sits, unmoved, while the air changes shape around him, and by the time he finishes talking, the guilty party is already dismantled. Mentally, morally, and, if Wolfe has his way, professionally. The reveal, as always, came without warning. No scheduled gathering this time. Just Wolfe, Fritz, Saul, and me in the office on a fog-heavy afternoon, the windows diffusing the grey light like smoke behind glass. The confrontation had already happened. The players had already been dismissed. All that remained was the conclusion Wolfe had held back. Not out of doubt, but because he knew the final nail should be driven in private. He began like he often did, seemingly at random. "She never intended to hurt anyone," he said. I looked up from the newspaper. Giselle. Of course, she intended to unsettle, to challenge, to humiliate, but not to injure. Right, because shifting spice tins is the culinary version of a slap. She believed, Wolfe went on, that she could craft narrative through food and behavior, that the delivery, the theft, the note, each was a controlled variable in her demonstration. But in believing so, she revealed the flaw she couldn't taste in herself, which was that she was predictable. That gave me pause. "You think she wanted you to figure her out?" "No," Wolfe said. "I think she couldn't help it." He reached over, opened a folder, and slid a printed note across the desk toward me. I recognized it immediately. The quote Giselle had included in my gift bag during her private tasting, "Taste is not what we inherit, it's what we claim." "She's been sending this quote to every critic, every chef, every investor," Wolfe said. "It's her calling card, her philosophy in one phrase." "So what?" "So," he said, "the note left behind my mortar said the same thing, only slightly altered. Taste is not what we inherit. It's what we take." I stared at the page. The change was small but not meaningless. It wasn't just semantics. It was strategy. "She wasn't offering flavor," Wolfe said. "She was asserting dominance." "You mean the difference between claiming and taking is permission. One implies merit, the other implies conquest." That was Wolfe's real revelation. Giselle had believed herself an artist, but every step she took said otherwise. Her demonstrations weren't invitations, they were intrusions. She wasn't curating, she was invading. Saul spoke for the first time in an hour. We traced the offshore payment that funded the delivery. "Let me guess," I said. "Not from Giselle's personal account." Number but routed through 3 shell companies, one of which had ties to a former Vandermeer Trust intern. Young woman used to assist Marcia Leamont. The assistant's assistant? Essentially. She recruited people to enable the illusion, Wolfe said. Each one shielded by another layer of abstraction, and none of them knew the full plan. Fritz stepped in to clear Wolfe's lunch tray and gave us both a look like he was ready to sanitize the entire building. "I have sterilized every surface in the kitchen," he muttered. "Twice." "Appreciated," Wolfe replied. When Fritz left, Wolfe turned back to me. "She chose to make the brownstone her theater," he said, "to show that even this space, sacred and controlled, could be molded to her taste." And she failed. Not quite. She succeeded in proving she could intrude. That was her goal. Then why didn't she win? Because she didn't understand what victory meant. Wolfe steepled his fingers and leaned back. "To me, the sanctity of this house is not merely a preference. It is a reflection of principle, precision, integrity, and that cannot be taken. It must be earned." She thought she could waltz in and redefine the rules. But rules are not invitations. They are boundaries. And she crossed them. Yes. And in doing so, she revealed herself. It all clicked then. Every detail Wolfe had quietly filed away. The altered quote, the specific spices chosen for tampering, even the timing of her messages, wasn't just evidence. It was character. Wolfe hadn't caught her through logic alone. He'd studied her patterns until her pretenses fell away. She wanted to provoke a response. Wolfe gave her one she didn't expect. Calm, clear rejection. He turned toward me again. You asked me why I didn't call the police. It's because the law does. Not know how to punish intrusion without theft. She did steal something, I said. Control, confidence, time. Yes, and I reclaimed them. There it was. Not a courtroom ending, no handcuffs, no public disgrace. Just a quiet expulsion, a message distributed among her peers, and a final letter that made it clear she would not cross his threshold again. Wolfe didn't need revenge. He needed restoration. What about the others? I asked. Severin, Annabelle. Bridge, they will retreat to their corners and pretend ignorance. That is their nature. I do not require confession, only acknowledgement. He gestured toward the shredder, where copies of the case notes were being fed page by page. This matter, he said, is concluded. I watched the final sheet disappear, then sat back in my chair. You know, I said, you could have let it go, treated the whole thing as a weird prank. I could have, he said, but that would have made her correct. We didn't speak for a while. The office returned to its usual rhythm, the faint clink of Fritz in the kitchen, the hum of the radiator, the ticking of the wall clock marking another solved equation in Wolfe's endless pursuit of order. Eventually, Wolfe reached for his book. I stood, stretched, and turned to leave. But just as I reached the doorway, he said something I didn't expect. She was a remarkable cook. I paused. Yeah. Her technique was flawless, her composition daring, but her hunger. He trailed off. Too much. Insatiable, Wolfe murmured. And that, Archie, is the one appetite I refuse to indulge. I didn't have anything clever to add. I just nodded and walked out, leaving Wolfe to his orchids, his principles, and his peace. Outside, the fog had lifted. The city was loud again, but inside the brownstone, everything was still, balanced, just the way he liked it. You'd think that after a week of veal thefts, false deliveries, culinary espionage, and a woman trying to turn Wolfe's kitchen into a stage play, the brownstone might still hum with aftershocks. But that's the thing about Wolfe. Once he restores the system, it holds. Everything returns to schedule. Meals resume. Orchids bloom. And if there's a sign anything ever happened, it's filed neatly in a manila folder marked closed. Still, the case left traces, not obvious ones. Wolfe didn't speak of Giselle Aramont again, not even when Gastronome Quarterly ran a blind item speculating about a renegade chef who trespassed one culinary titan too many. Not even when Saul sent word that her club was operating at a half capacity, her waiting list gone, her sponsors quiet. Wolfe read the report, raised one eyebrow, and moved on to a review of Tunisian olive oils, which in Wolfe speak is the equivalent of spiking a football. But I knew better. So did Fritz. We both noticed how Wolfe insisted on reorganizing the spice wall, personally. How he spent 2 hours one Sunday verifying each tin's label, weight, and placement. He didn't delegate it to Fritz, didn't trust me to eye it. He needed to do it himself, as if the spices had been violated, not just rearranged. That's the 3rd time you've checked the bay leaf tin, I said from the doorway that afternoon. He didn't look up. Bay leaves are deceptive. You think they do nothing until they're missing. Fritz and I exchanged a look later. It meant he's still bristling, but in his own quiet Wolfe way. On Monday, a delivery arrived. Legitimate this time. French cheeses, wrapped and chilled, from a trusted vendor Wolfe had worked with since the Reagan administration. Fritz unpacked them with the delicacy of a museum conservator. He found a single note slipped inside the crate, handwritten on creme stationery. No bitterness in the brie. Just silence in the room. Gia Wolfe didn't comment when Fritz gave it to him. He read it, folded it twice, and placed it in the back of a drawer with an elegance that felt like sealing a chapter shut. No shredder, no matchstick, just storage, a reminder. I wasn't surprised. He never hated Giselle. He disliked being manipulated. He despised transgression, but he understood brilliance, even when it came dressed in arrogance. "Do you think she's done?" I asked him that evening after dinner. "She will try again," he said. "Elsewhere, with someone who mistakes her chaos for invention. And what if they don't? They will learn," he said simply. Wolfe had moved on, but the culinary world hadn't. Calls started coming in, from chefs, reviewers, curators of tasting rooms and boutique food expos. All wanted to know what had happened at the Brownstone. Was Giselle finished? Had Wolfe really summoned her, dined and dismissed her? He refused every interview, turned down 3 speaking requests, declined to comment on the rumors. His official statement, dictated to me, was 5 words: "No comment, let her fade." And fade she did. Her name started vanishing from tasting rosters, from society invites, from articles where she'd normally be cited as provocative or boundary-pushing. The industry didn't cancel her. It just forgot. A week later, Milton Bridge sent Wolfe a clipping from Culinary Vanguard. It contained a small paragraph buried near the bottom of a column. When a chef tries to rewrite the rules of hospitality, she risks rewriting herself out of the narrative. Wolfe smiled when he read it. Not a grin, just a slight upturn of the lips, which, from him, is practically euphoria. As for Clinton Severin, he resurfaced on an Instagram page hawking molecular gastronomy meal kits. No mention of Pan Metro, no mention of Wolfe. Just foam, smoke, and the occasional edible flower. Bridge, true to his word, wrote a scathing but fair piece on the dangers of culinary narcissism. It didn't name names, but it didn't have to. Anyone in the know knew. Annabelle Vandermeer returned to her foundation and issued a formal policy on data access in legacy trusts. She called it the Learmont Clause. Wolfe refused to comment, but I caught him nodding slightly when I mentioned it over lunch. And Wolfe? He got his silence back. But silence, I've learned, is never the end of a Wolfe case. There's always a final comment, tucked somewhere in the folds of a quiet moment. It came one night, a week after everything had settled. We were in the office. He was rereading a rare cookbook sent by a contact in Lyon. I was flipping through the mail when I found a padded envelope, postmarked New York, with no return address. Inside was a single teaspoon, silver, ornate, polished. No note, just the spoon. I showed it to Wolfe. He examined it with an inscrutable expression, then handed it back. "Keep it," he said. "For what?" "As a reminder." "Of what?" "That even the most refined spoons," he said, returning to his book, "can still stir a pot." I placed the spoon on the shelf beside the globe. Not hidden, not featured, just there. Later that evening, Fritz served a simple supper: leek soup, roasted carrots, and a small apple tart with a honey glaze. Wolfe ate every bite, said nothing, but at the end, he dabbed his mouth, looked up, and said, "You may tell Fritz, balance has returned." I did. And Fritz, ever the loyal steward of Wolfe's world, gave the smallest of bows and smiled. That was it. That was the epilogue. No sirens, no scandal, just order, restored. The trespass had been answered, the violator silenced not by violence, but by precision. Giselle may have tried to use taste as a weapon, but Wolfe, he used silence as the final course. The last thing Wolfe ever said about Giselle Aramont wasn't spoken to her, or about her, or even really for her. It came 2 weeks after the whole affair had ended, after the veal was restocked, the spice wall restored, and the last of the surveillance footage tucked into a folder that would gather dust until Wolfe's library burned down or was auctioned by a distant relative. We were on the balcony off the plant rooms. Yes, even Wolfe steps into fresh air when it's filtered by enough orchids. It was unseasonably warm, and I'd brought up a tray of lemon biscuits Fritz had made using a new varietal of basil Wolfe wanted to test in desserts. He bit into one, chewed slowly, and said, "People who weaponize taste misunderstand its nature." "Yeah," I said, half listening, half watching the pigeons on the neighboring roof. "They believe it is exclusionary," Wolfe continued, "that it elevates them, distinguishes them. But taste, true taste, is a form of discipline, not dominance." I waited. When Wolfe starts on one of these, you don't interrupt. You just keep him in biscuits. He leaned back in the chair, not quite relaxed, but in that rare state where he lets a thought stretch its legs, before sitting down again. "Giselle believed mastery gave her the right to transgress," he said. "But discipline without humility is not taste. It is vanity." "Still," I said, "she had skill. You said so yourself." "She did. But it was in service of spectacle, not substance. The spice tampering, the note, the gestures, they were flourishes. A true craftsman doesn't need to be noticed at every turn, only understood at the end." I took a biscuit myself and gave it a thoughtful chew. Not bad, needed a touch more citrus. "Then what would you say she lacked?" I asked. "Restraint," Wolfe said simply. "The courage to be subtle without fear, the confidence to remain unseen while still shaping everything." He stood slowly, gingerly. The man only moves when he's sure it's worth the effort. "I once told you," he said as we re-entered the plant room, "that the greatest compliment to a dish is not silence, it is memory." "Yeah, I remember that." "And no one," Wolfe added, "will remember her for what she cooked. Only what she broke." That was it. That was the line that stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, Wolfe doesn't do melodrama, but because it clarified everything. Giselle had tried to become unforgettable by invading someone else's ritual. She'd believed that brilliance gave her the right to rewrite the rules of the house. But in Wolfe's world, rules weren't up for revision. Not because they were stubborn, but because they were built on values she had never respected: order, balance, and quiet excellence. The rest of the season passed uneventfully. Wolfe took 2 new clients, both involving forgeries, one of them edible. Saul resumed his usual rhythm, popping in with insights, files, or silent confirmation that the world remained mostly irrational. Fritz experimented with bergamot for weeks, searching for the right ratio that wouldn't bully the custard. And I kept an eye on the mail just in case, but nothing came. Giselle disappeared in the way that only the ambitious do. No collapse, no explosion, just a slow fading. One month she's on 3 guest lists, the next she's cited in a footnote about culinary burnout. Bridges' review made its rounds, of course. He never named her, but anyone who'd ever eaten at l'Étagère Noire could read between the lines. Critics are like that. Subtle daggers, velvet hilts. As for Clinton Severin, he finally gave an interview to some streaming food series. Claimed he'd been caught in an ideological conflict between evolving palates and the culinary old guard. He didn't mention Wolfe. That was smart. Annabelle's name showed up on a new trust reform policy bill. Something about limiting access credentials and adding dual authentication to charitable endowments. Saul said the clause was nicknamed the Wolfe Safeguard, though not publicly. One afternoon, Fritz asked Wolfe if he planned to attend the EE, Annual Gastronomy Hall lecture. This year's speaker was a minimalist Japanese chef who built 10-course meals around a single grain. Wolfe declined. "I know how rice tastes," he said. Still, I could tell he was settling again. Restoring. There's a rhythm to Wolfe's life. Ordered, deliberate, slightly obsessive. When it gets disrupted, even slightly, he realigns not by force, but by patience. And eventually, things go back where they belong. Except the spoon. The silver spoon Giselle had mailed still sat on the corner of the credenza, untouched. Not cleaned, not polished, just resting there, catching the occasional morning light. "You're never going to throw it away, are you?" I asked him once. He didn't answer. Because of course he wasn't. Wolfe doesn't keep trophies, but he keeps records, and the spoon was one of them, a small, glinting reminder that taste is not just about what you add, but what you remove, about what you preserve, even when others try to distort it. The kitchen remained undisturbed. The orchids thrived, and the brownstone, as ever, stood exactly where it had always been, immune to trend, defiant of ego, and quietly, unshakably ruled by a man who understood that true mastery does not demand attention. It earns it, one perfect bite at a time.